What happens when two of the most powerful women in entertainment sit down for what should be a simple interview, and it turns into a clash that shocks everyone watching? When country music legend Reba McIntyre walked onto the set, nobody expected the conversation to spiral into one of the most intense confrontations ever captured on daytime television. This wasn't about publicity stunts or manufactured drama. This was real, raw, and completely unscripted. Before we dive into exactly what was said that led to Reba being escorted off the stage, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on. After hearing this whole story, the studio audience settled into their seats, the familiar warmth of the set creating an atmosphere of comfort and anticipation. Oprah sat poised in her chair, her notes carefully arranged on the small table beside her. Reba walked out to thunderous applause, that signature red hair catching the studio lights, her smile genuine as she waved to the crowd. She sat down, crossing her legs, and the interview began like any other. "Reba, welcome back," Oprah said, her voice carrying that practiced blend of warmth and authority. "It's been too long since we've had you here." "Well, you know me, Oprah," Reba replied with an easy laugh. "I've been busy living life, making music, and trying to stay true to who I am." "Speaking of staying true to yourself," Oprah continued, glancing at her notes, "you've been very vocal lately about the direction of country music, about how the industry is changing. Some people say you're resistant to progress. How do you respond to that?" The audience murmured softly, sensing the shift in tone. Reba's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. "I think there's a difference between progress and losing your identity," Reba said carefully. "Country music has roots, traditions that mean something. When you strip all that away in the name of being modern, you're not progressing. You're just abandoning what made you special in the first place." Oprah leaned forward slightly. "But isn't that exactly what older generations always say, that the new generation is ruining everything? Rock and roll face the same criticism. Hip-hop face the same criticism. Aren't you just repeating history?" "With all due respect, Oprah," Reba's voice took on an edge, "you're comparing apples to oranges. Those genres fought to exist, fought for recognition. Country music already exists. It already has its place. What I'm talking about is watching something you love get diluted until it's unrecognizable. Not because it's evolving naturally, but because executives in boardrooms decided that authenticity doesn't sell as well as whatever's trending on social media this week." The studio went quiet. Oprah's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe challenge. "So, you're saying the artists themselves have no agency?" Oprah asked. "That they're just puppets being controlled by these faceless executives?" "I'm saying that when you're a young artist and you're told that the only way to get played on the radio, the only way to get a record deal, the only way to be successful is to sound like everything else that's already out there, you start to believe you don't have a choice," Reba fired back. "I'm saying the system is broken, and pretending it's not doesn't help anyone." "You had the luxury of coming up in a different era," Oprah countered, her tone sharpening. "An era where the gatekeepers looked like you, where the barriers to entry were lower for someone with your background. These young artists you're criticizing are trying to break through in a much more competitive landscape. Maybe they're not abandoning tradition. Maybe they're just trying to survive in an industry that's harder than it's ever been." Reba's jaw tightened. "The gatekeepers look like me? Oprah, do you have any idea what it was like being a woman in country music in the 80s? Do you know how many doors got slammed in my face? How many times I was told I should stick to being pretty and let the men handle the real music? I didn't have anything handed to me. I fought for every single thing I have." "I'm not saying you didn't work hard," Oprah said, her voice steady but firm. "What I'm saying is that you're now in a position of power, a position of influence, and instead of using that to lift up the next generation, you're tearing them down. You're doing exactly what those men did to you." The audience gasped. Reba's face flushed, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "I am not tearing anyone down," Reba said, her voice rising. "I'm trying to preserve something that matters. I'm trying to make sure that country music still means something 10 years from now, 20 years from now. If that makes me the villain in your narrative, then so be it. But don't you dare compare me to the men who tried to silence me." "Then what would you call it?" Oprah pressed. "You've publicly criticized artists by name. You've said their music isn't real country. You've said they're sellouts. How is that not tearing them down?" "Because I'm telling the truth," Reba shot back. "And if the truth hurts, maybe that says more about them than it does about me." I've earned the right to have an opinion about the genre I've dedicated my life to. I've earned the right to call it like I see it. Earned the right? Oprah's eyebrows raised. Or do you just think that because you've been successful, your opinion is more valid than anyone else's? That sounds an awful lot like the gatekeeping you claim to be against. Reba stood up suddenly, and the audience collectively held its breath. She didn't walk off. Not yet, but she was standing, her body language screaming that this interview had crossed a line. You know what, Oprah? I came here today thinking we were going to have a real conversation. I thought you of all people would understand what it's like to watch something you love be commodified and stripped of its soul. But I see now that you're more interested in sound bites than substance. You want me to be the bad guy in this story because it's easier than admitting that maybe, just maybe, not all change is good. Not all progress moves us forward. Oprah remained seated, her expression unreadable. Sit down, Reba. We're not done here. Actually, Reba said, her voice cold. I think we are. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Camera operators glanced at each other uncertainly. Producers in the control room frantically whispered into their headsets. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how these interviews went. Oprah Winfrey didn't lose control of her show. But as Reba stood there, defiant and furious, it was clear that something had fundamentally shifted. If you walk off this stage right now, Oprah said quietly, but her voice carried through the silent studio. You're proving my point. You can't handle being challenged. You can't handle someone disagreeing with you. That's not strength, Reba. That's ego. Reba's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Reba turned back to face Oprah fully, and instead of walking away, she sat back down with deliberate slowness. The audience exhaled collectively, but the relief was premature. If anyone thought the storm had passed, they were wrong. This was just the eye of the hurricane. You want to talk about ego? Reba said, her voice dangerously calm. Now let's talk about ego, Oprah. You sit here in your empire that you built, and I respect that. I truly do. But you've become so removed from the struggles of everyday people that you've forgotten what it's like to fight for something that isn't about money or fame or influence. Country music isn't just entertainment to the people who love it. It's their story. It's their voice. And when that gets taken away, when it gets homogenized into something unrecognizable, they lose a part of themselves. That's incredibly condescending, Oprah replied, her composure cracking just slightly. You're assuming that these fans, these people you claim to represent, can't think for themselves, that they can't decide what they like and don't like. You're positioning yourself as their protector, when maybe they don't need protecting. Maybe they're perfectly happy with how country music is evolving. Or maybe they feel like they don't have a choice, Reba countered. Maybe when you turn on the radio and everything sounds the same, when every song has the same drum machine beat and the same auto-tuned vocals, maybe you just accept it because you think that's all there is. That doesn't mean they're happy with it. That means they've been conditioned to accept less. Oprah shook her head slowly. You're talking about authenticity like it's this pure, unchanging thing. But authenticity evolves, Reba. What was authentic in 1985 isn't necessarily authentic today. Young artists bringing in influences from pop, from hip-hop, from R&B, that's their authenticity. That's their truth. Who are you to tell them it's not valid? I'm not telling them their truth isn't valid, Reba said, her frustration evident. I'm telling them that if they want to make pop music, make pop music. If they want to make hip-hop, make hip-hop. But don't slap a cowboy hat on it and call it country just because it's easier to get a record deal that way. Don't exploit a genre's built-in audience while simultaneously destroying what that genre stands for. So now you're gatekeeping, Oprah said, and there was an unmistakable note of satisfaction in her voice, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. You're literally deciding who gets to call themselves country and who doesn't. That's the definition of gatekeeping, and it's exactly the kind of exclusionary thinking that holds entire industries back. It's not gatekeeping to have standards, Reba snapped. It's not exclusionary to say that words mean something, that genres exist for a reason. If everything is country, then nothing is country. If we throw the doors wide open and say anything goes, then we lose the very thing that made country music special in the first place. And I'm sorry if that offends your modern sensibilities, but some of us still believe that heritage matters, that tradition matters. Heritage, Oprah repeated, her tone sharp. Tradition. Those are interesting words coming from someone who built her career on breaking traditions. You acted when female country singers weren't supposed to act. You started your own label when you weren't supposed to have that kind of control. You pushed boundaries constantly. But now that you're comfortable, now that you've made it, suddenly tradition is sacred. That's not principle, Reba. That's pulling the ladder up behind you. The audience was completely silent now, mesmerized by the verbal warfare unfolding before them. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was personal. You don't know anything about my principles, Reba said, her voice shaking with anger. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've given up to protect this music. I pushed boundaries within country music, not outside of it. I expanded what country could be without abandoning what country was. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then this conversation is pointless. What I see, Oprah said, leaning back in her chair with a calculated coolness, is someone who's afraid. You're afraid of becoming irrelevant. You're afraid that these younger artists are going to eclipse you, that their version of country music is going to be what people remember, and yours is going to be forgotten. So, you're lashing out, trying to delegitimize them before they can make you obsolete. The color drained from Reba's face. How dare you, she whispered. I dare because someone needs to say it, Oprah continued, her voice rising. You've wrapped yourself in this mantle of protector, this guardian of country music, but really you're just scared. And instead of adapting, instead of finding your place in this new landscape, you're trying to tear it all down. You're trying to make everyone else feel as threatened as you do. I am not threatened by anyone, Reba said through gritted teeth. I'm 60 years old. I've had more success than I ever dreamed possible. I don't need to compete with 25-year-olds. What I need is for people to understand that we're losing something precious, something that can't be replaced once it's gone. And the fact that you can't comprehend that, the fact that you think this is about my ego or my career, shows how little you actually understand about what's at stake. Then explain it to me, Oprah challenged. Explain what's at stake in a way that doesn't sound like you're just mad that the world has moved on without you. Reba's eyes flashed. Country music is the voice of working people, Oprah. It's the music of farmers and factory workers and truck drivers and waitresses. It's the music of people who don't get written about in your magazine, who don't get invited to your celebrity parties. And when you turn that music into something slick and polished and designed to appeal to coastal elites and pop radio, you're silencing those people. You're telling them their stories don't matter anymore, that their lives aren't interesting enough, that they need to be repackaged and sanitized to be worthy of attention. That's a beautiful speech, Oprah said, and her tone made it clear she didn't think it was beautiful at all. But let me ask you something. How many of those farmers and factory workers and truck drivers can afford tickets to your concerts? How much do you charge for meet and greets? Where do you live, Reba? Because I'm guessing it's not in a trailer park. I'm guessing you're not struggling to make ends meet. So don't sit here and pretend you're some champion of the working class when you've been wealthy and isolated from their reality for decades. My bank account doesn't change where I came from, Reba shot back. It doesn't erase the fact that I grew up on a ranch in Oklahoma, that I know what it's like to work until your hands bleed, that I understand the lives of the people my music speaks to because I lived that life. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be successful. But that doesn't disqualify me from caring about the people I left behind. Or maybe it does, Oprah said quietly. Maybe you've been gone so long that you've lost touch. Maybe the people you think you're defending have already moved on. Maybe they like the new country music. Maybe they relate to it in ways they never related to yours. Have you considered that? Of course I've considered that, Reba said, her voice breaking slightly. I've considered every possible angle of this. And maybe I am wrong. Maybe I'm just an old woman yelling at clouds. But I'd rather be wrong and fighting for something I believe in than sitting back and watching it all burn because I was too afraid of being called irrelevant or out of touch. Then why are you so angry? Oprah asked, her voice softer now, almost gentle, which somehow made the question more cutting. If you're so confident in your position, if you're so sure you're right, why are you this upset? Why are you so defensive? Reba opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time since the interview began, she looked uncertain. The audience waited, the silence stretching uncomfortably long. Because, Reba finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I'm watching something I love die, and nobody seems to care. And that's terrifying. Or, Oprah said, and her voice had gone cold again, it's not dying, it's changing, and you're too stubborn to see the difference. Reba stood up again, and this time there was finality in the movement. You know what the real problem is here? Reba said, and her voice had transformed from anger into something colder, more controlled. The real problem is that you've made a career out of telling people's stories. But you only want to tell the stories that fit your narrative. You only want the truth when it's convenient, when it makes you look good, when it doesn't challenge the audience too much. Well, I'm sorry that my truth isn't tidy enough for you. I'm sorry that caring about something beyond myself doesn't make for good television. Oprah stood now too, and the power dynamic shifted yet again. Two titans facing each other, neither willing to back down. "Don't you dare question my commitment to truth," Oprah said, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "I have given people a platform for their voices for decades. I have told uncomfortable stories. I have challenged audiences. I have risked my reputation countless times to bring light to issues that matter. So don't stand there and act like you have some monopoly on authenticity just because you're angry about the direction of country music." "This isn't about having a monopoly on authenticity," Reba fired back. "This is about you refusing to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, there are legitimate concerns about what's happening in my industry. Instead of having a real conversation, you've turned this into a psychoanalysis session, diagnosing me with fear and ego and whatever else fits your predetermined conclusion. You invited me here to talk, but you don't want to talk. You want to lecture. You want to put me in my place. I want you to be honest," Oprah countered. "With me and with yourself. You're hiding behind this noble cause, this protection of country music, but what you're really protecting is your own legacy. You're protecting your place in history. And there's nothing wrong with that, Reba. We all want to be remembered. We all want what we built to matter. But don't dress it up as something more than it is." "You don't get to tell me what my motivations are," Reba said, her voice shaking now with barely contained fury. "You don't get to sit there and reduce everything I've said, everything I believe, into some kind of midlife crisis or fear of mortality. I know exactly what I'm fighting for, and it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the millions of people whose stories won't be told anymore if country music becomes just another genre of pop music with a twang." "Then tell me this," Oprah said, her voice dropping to an intense, focused tone. "If a young artist walks into a studio tomorrow and records a song that blends country with hip-hop, that uses modern production, that talks about experiences you've never had in a way you've never heard, why is that less valid than what you did 40 years ago? Why is their authentic expression of their truth worth less than yours?" "It's not worth less," Reba said, exasperated. "I've never said it's worth less. What I'm saying is that it's not country music. It can be good. It can be meaningful. It can be important. But calling it country music, when it shares almost nothing with the genre's foundation, is dishonest. It's marketing. It's using a brand name that other people built to sell something completely different." "So, you do want to gatekeep," Oprah said, and there was a note of triumph in her voice. "You do want to decide who gets to use that label and who doesn't. And the people who don't fit your definition, they're just supposed to what? Call their music something else, create a whole new genre, start from scratch with no audience, no infrastructure, no support system. If that's what it takes to maintain integrity, then yes," Reba said, and the audience audibly gasped at her bluntness. "Yes, that's what I'm saying. Because that's what generations of country artists did before. They built something from nothing. They didn't ride on someone else's coattails. They didn't appropriate someone else's legacy and then gut it from the inside." "Listen to yourself," Oprah said, shaking her head in what looked like genuine disbelief. "You're talking about young artists trying to make a living, trying to express themselves like they're criminals, like they're stealing something from you. They're not appropriating anything. They're participating in a living, breathing art form that's supposed to grow and change and reflect the times we live in. And I'm saying that there are limits to how much something can change before it becomes something else entirely," Reba shot back. "A tree can grow in different directions. It can develop new branches, but it's still connected to its roots. What's happening now is people cutting down the tree and planting something completely different in its place, but still calling it the same tree because the location hasn't changed. That's a false equivalency and you know it," Oprah said. "Music isn't a tree. It's not a fixed biological entity. It's an expression of culture, and culture changes. Culture evolves. And trying to freeze it in time, trying to preserve it in amber like some museum piece. That's not respect. That's death. That's suffocation." "No," Reba said, her voice rising to match Oprah's intensity. "What's suffocating is being told that you're not allowed to have standards. That you're not allowed to say this is what country music is, and this is what it isn't. That everything has to be inclusive and accepting to the point where nothing means anything anymore. That's what suffocates art. That's what kills creativity. When there are no boundaries, when there's no definition, when anything goes, you don't get freedom. You get chaos. Better chaos than fascism. Oprah snapped, and the word hung in the air like a bomb. Reba's face went white. Did you just call me a fascist for having an opinion about music? I called your thinking fascistic, Oprah clarified, but there was no softening in her tone. This idea that there's one right way, one pure form, one acceptable version of what country music should be, and everything else is corruption or degradation. That's authoritarian thinking. Reba, that's the opposite of what art should be. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, Reba said, her voice filled with disbelief. Having genre distinctions is not fascism. Having standards is not authoritarianism. What you're describing is literally just having categories, having definitions. By your logic, every music critic, every historian, every person who's ever said this belongs here, and that belongs there is a fascist. Do you hear how absurd that sounds? What I hear, Oprah said, her composure cracking now, real anger seeping through, is someone so committed to being right that you can't see how harmful your rhetoric is. You've spent this entire interview dismissing, diminishing, and delegitimizing young artists. You've positioned yourself as the arbiter of what's real and what's fake. And now you're offended that I'm pointing out the logical conclusion of that thinking. The logical conclusion of my thinking is that country music survives, Reba said, her voice breaking. The logical conclusion of your thinking is that it disappears completely, absorbed into some generic pop sound that has no soul, no history, no meaning. And maybe that's fine with you. Maybe you don't care, but I do. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Nobody's asking you to apologize for caring, Oprah said, and for the first time, there was something like weariness in her voice. What I'm asking you to do is examine why you care in the way that you do. Why your caring has to involve tearing down others. Why your love for traditional country music requires you to hate what's coming next. I don't hate what's coming next, Reba said quietly. I'm just mourning what we're losing. And apparently that's not allowed anymore either. The silence that followed was profound. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The audience didn't dare make a sound. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if uncertain whether to keep rolling. I think we're done here, Oprah finally said, and her voice was flat, emotionless. Thank you for coming on the show, Reba. That's it, Reba asked, incredulous. That's how you're ending this? After everything that was just said, you're just going to dismiss me? What else is there to say? Oprah replied. We clearly have fundamentally different worldviews. We're not going to resolve that today. So, yes, I'm ending the interview. No, Reba said, and she took a step toward Oprah. You don't get to do this. You don't get to bait me, attack me, accuse me of being a fascist, and then just shut it down when you don't like how it's going. If you want to end this, then you're going to have to ask me to leave. You're going to have to own that decision. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Producers were frantically gesturing from offstage. Security personnel had moved closer, though no one was quite sure what to do. Fine, Oprah said, her voice like ice. Reba, I'm asking you to leave my stage. Reba stared at her for a long moment, and something flickered across her face. Pain maybe, or vindication, or both. Gladly, she said, and without another word, without looking at the audience, without the courtesy of a goodbye, Reeba McIntyre walked off the stage of the Oprah Winfrey show for the last time. The cameras kept rolling as Oprah turned to face them directly, her expression carefully neutral. We'll be right back, she said, but her voice wavered just slightly. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The moment was captured and nothing would ever be quite the same. If you made it this far, you just witnessed one of the most intense confrontations in talk show history. These two powerhouses held nothing back, and the question remains, who was right? Let me know in the comments.